In Welsh mythology, King Arthur had a cousin named Cellach, who intended to marry Olwen, the daughter of a terribly cruel and powerful giant named Ysbyddaden. Now, Ysbyddaden knew he would die the day his daughter wed, so he created 39 impossible tasks Cellach would have to complete in order to earn her hand. And then he added that Cellach would also have to slay the great boar Turk Truth too, because reasons. Well, King Arthur knew they were up to the 39 impossible tasks, but they were going to need some help with the boar. Luckily, he knew a sun god named Mabon, who also happened to be a renowned hunter. Only problem was, Mabon had been kidnapped as a baby and had been missing for his entire life. So King Arthur and company go on a quest to find Mabon, and after talking to his mother, a blackbird, a stag, an owl, and an eagle, they finally chat with the Salmon of Wisdom. The Salmon of Wisdom tells them that Mabon is imprisoned in a dungeon of darkness. King Arthur is like, okay, that's probably not ideal for a sun god, so let's go rescue him, which they do. And Mabon, so thankful to, see the sun, joins Team Camelot. King Arthur and Cellach then ask Mabon if he would be willing to hunt the great boar no man has been able to kill. And Mabon is like, yeah, I'm all about that. Pay no attention to the fact that I have spent my entire existence in a dungeon and have no idea why I'd be a great hunter, but I totally am, so let's do this. And he does. He swiftly dispatches the beast. Team Camelot then defeats Ysbyddaden, and Cellach marries Olwen. This is the story behind the pagan holiday Mabon happening Wednesday, the holiday that kicks off what's often referred to as shadow season, which, as you might suspect, is the best time of the year to do shadow work. So today we'll talk about what shadow work is, how to get started, and what Mabon has to do with Carl Jung and Disco. I'm Rachel Wilkinson, and welcome to Lifemancy. You're driving down a rural interstate in the dead of night. You can only see as far ahead of you as your headlights light the road. It is a very Lost Highway movie vibe. And then, in the distance, you think you see something flicker. A glint of metal or a mirror maybe catching the light of your high beams and reflecting them back to you. But you can't be sure. So you slow down, unsure of the road ahead, when suddenly, all the electrical equipment in your car fades with a soft whoom, and your very environmentally friendly hybrid dies too. And now you're stuck alone, in the middle of the road, with no one else around for miles. You grab your cell phone, it's dead too. You can't even turn it on, it's a brick. And this is when you realize that you are right and truly screwed. So, you grab your things, and leave your car behind, and start walking toward that glint of light you saw in the distance. Maybe there's civilization there, or a gas station, or someone, anyone. But just as you formulate your plan, a bright beam of light comes down from the sky. It's this bluish shade of green, and it completely envelops you. And that's when you start to hear a very deep, resonant hum coming towards you from above. You use your hands to shade your eyes as you look up. And above is a vague outline of a saucer. And that is when you realize you are about to be abducted by aliens. Sure enough, you feel your feet lift from the road as you float up into the alien spacecraft. But instead of seeing some awesome technology and little green men, you're pulled into a corridor where the force field holding you turns you toward a wall of undulating silver liquid. As you stare at your own watery reflection, you hear an alien voice in your head, and that voice gives you a single command: describe yourself so that we may judge if you are human. But with such a vague directive, how would you describe yourself? Do you stick to physical traits? Height, hair color, gender? Do you include your skills and talents, or maybe what you do for a living? Do you describe the role you play with others? Are you the supportive friend, or are you the entertainment committee? And what traits about yourself do you talk about? Think about it for a minute. In this totally alien situation, pun absolutely intended, how do you describe yourself? What's the first thing that comes to mind? What trait do you immediately think of? And then what are 2 or 3 or 4 more things you'd tell them? No, really. Take a minute. Think about it. So Carl Jung developed a model of our human psyche. We have ourselves, and the self sits at the center between the conscious and unconscious mind, as well as our inner and outer world. In the outer world, you project your persona and ego, and within your inner world is your anima or animus. Your anima or animus is your shadow. You see, Jung believed that we are born human. I know, so controversial, but I mean more metaphorically. As babies, we had the psyche of a human, which has a bunch of different traits. And right from the get-go, we're socialized based on the values of society at the time. And people praise us or punish us. A baby is sweet and loving. A baby is also self-centered and greedy. A baby can be generous. A baby can also be mean. And as we learn that being loving is good and being greedy is not, and being generous is good and being mean is not, and those things that aren't acceptable, we repress and hide, and we bury these parts of ourselves and do everything we can to avoid thinking about them. We take all those parts of our psyche that we don't like or we don't want to admit and shove them into a dark pit, hopefully never to see the light of day again. Those are our shadows, or shadow self. Shadow work is our ability to turn toward, process, and accept the parts of ourselves that we consider flawed, shameful, embarrassing. And if you prefer Freud, think of your id. Id and shadow self, basically the same thing. It's essentially like, what choice would you make if there were no consequences and no one would know what you did, not even the gods? Whatever comes to mind, welcome to your shadow. So let's get back to our alien spaceship. So when you think about it, what feels comfortable telling the aliens? How did you define yourself? What parts did you leave out? Was there anything you didn't want them to know about you? And I want you to think about that as I delve into the astrology report. I'm dedicating this astrology report to Jaguar Rose. Now, I don't know if it's an issue with Apple or you decided to delete your review after having second thoughts, but it isn't there anymore, so I won't go into what you said. But mostly, I just wanted to say, you are exactly the person I created the podcast for. Even if this is just something to listen to get your brain off whatever you are obsessing over at the moment. Your review has stayed with me for days. And I hope you have stuck around long enough to hear this because there's so much happening for us that we don't even realize at the time. Sometimes even knows the best thing for us and we don't even realize it till much later. And in fact, hang on a second. Okay. People listen to this podcast for all sorts of different reasons. All of them are great. Some are people who know me and it's more fun to listen to this than it is reading my Facebook posts. Others like the adventures into subjects they would never think to explore themselves, and some are witches and people who like learning about science and history. And I was getting so much feedback about those reasons that I started developing a complex. To be fair, me developing a complex is a day that ends in Y. But my complex was that I was talking about myself too much. I read a dumb comment in a podcasting group. The question posed to the group was, what makes you turn off a podcast? And there were answers you'd assume like bad sound, boring guests, not interested in the topic. But then there was this one woman, and her comment was, I turn off a podcast as soon as I hear the host say I. Meaning, as soon as the host talks about themselves, she turns it off. She wanted all content, no personality. And that comment has stayed with me for well over a year. And for a time, I went through this whole, oh my God, I talk about myself so much on this podcast. It's too much. Everyone thinks I'm totally self-involved. I just have to stop talking about my own life. And I really struggled with this push-pull of, do you talk about yourself? Do you not talk about yourself? Do you tell stories about yourself? Do you not? So reading from you that what I've shared about my own life helps you, helps reassure me. I've gotten better about not trying to be all things to all people, which is definitely a lesson I think we can all learn. But it's still nice to hear. So thank you. I really appreciated your review. Okay, now, I've been waiting 6 months for this astrology report because it is time to open our time capsules. I really hope you put one together. And if you didn't because of life and busy and stuff and things and reasons, or you're a new listener, we will absolutely do this again. But 6 months ago, during the Are There Fairies in My House episode, the astrology report was about the new moon in Pisces. Every 6 months, what was the new moon becomes the full moon. And at the time, Neptune and Venus and the new moon in Pisces were creating this make your dreams reality energy, big manifestation energy. As a way to harness it, I talked about putting together a little time capsule and not touching it until today, using the full moon in Pisces as the completion, plus Neptune is being pretty awesome right now. It was all this kind of reflection of 6 months ago to the present. And I also thought waiting 6 months would hopefully show how progress can happen even when we don't know it's happening, or how what we may have wished for 6 months ago doesn't have the same grip on us as it does today. And it was just trying to get kind of this higher level of 6 months gives us time to forget what we were doing before. Maybe that's just me. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to open mine right here, right now, for the first time in 6 months with you all. So I don't know how exactly this is going to work since it's not video, but maybe I should have done video. Maybe I should have recorded this. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, you'll get the sounds. I should do some ASMR like, hey, this is the box shaking. All right. So in it, Jason, I have your pouch, Jason Rule, and it has crystals in it. Creaking of the leather. And so we had a lot of crystals for creativity and communication, and lots of good quartz in there. I also had a key, like a key to dreams. But the thing I also did is I wrote myself a letter, and I don't think I'm not brave enough to read this letter out loud to all you all. I'm sorry. I will tell you, however, who I addressed it to. So this was written on March 15th, 2021. I'm laughing because it's just, So, Dear Apollo, Muses, and the Angels of Writing and Storytelling. So, yeah, okay, I know what I've been obsessed with for months. I'm also laughing because my number one priority in this letter was to Apollo specifically. I said, my priority will be to change the fact that I put you in my closet. And I apologize for keeping you in a place with no light and no sun. And it should have been an obvious mistake. So it was an obvious mistake. And I think I talked about this later. And I think it's also really interesting and coincidental that my opening story was about Mabon, which is the same thing, like being trapped in darkness and being released into the light, which is going to come into more of the episode later. So I did 2 divinations, one of which was I pulled a tarot card and the other I pulled runes. The tarot card was the Hierophant, and I interpreted that as the need for ritual, and ritual in the sense that I needed to make time to write and time to create and set aside sacred time, as I called it, which was the uninterrupted cocoon of silence in which you can create. So, I kind of, sort of did that. And then the other is the runes, which, well, this is only interesting because of the last episode with the Akashic Records. I wrote the interpretation. The first line of it says, I stand at the precipice of action or delay. It can go either way. And it will be my physical determination that will make or break my situation. And I find that only amusing because of the vampire podcast, which you want to talk about making or breaking a situation. It's coming out next week, by the way. And if you're at all into vampires, you should definitely check it out. But yeah, so in the letter, I talked about, I need to write a book. I need to write a book. I need to write a book. And I did write a book. I just turned it into an audio drama. But that script was 220 pages, which is essentially kind of a book. So we're going to see if this audio drama thing works out. So yes, if you are interested in vampires, go check it out. And if you would like to share your own 6-month time capsule with me, you can email me, you can DM me if you want to show me a picture. If you did this, I really hope you did this. I hope I was not the only one. So I guess it's time to talk about some shadow work. So, as I was saying, shadow work is learning to acknowledge the darker parts of yourself, the aspects you believe aren't socially acceptable, with the goal of accepting them as part of who you are. And if those darker parts are problematic, shadow work is investigating their origins and learning how to evolve and integrate them. I think it's important to keep in mind that just because it's our shadow self, that doesn't mean it can't or shouldn't be an authentic part of us. And a lot of times, even just being able to recognize and be aware that we have a certain quality, that alone is a huge step. So, for example, I am competitive. Not aggressively so, but if I and someone else are attempting to achieve the same victory, I'm in it to win it. And I'll work all the way up to the bitter, bitter end of when that race is called. For a long time, I thought that was because I was ambitious. And it was the nature of ambitious people to be competitive. It's only been more recently that I can see my shadow self at work here, because pride and wrath are my deadly sense of choice. And while I might have wanted to believe it was the more socially acceptable ambitiousness that fueled me, no. Ambition in me is more like my own personal wind farm. It's a breeze that carries me like a pirate ship looking for plunder. It's a good time island hopping. I get to wear a jaunty hat and I have a flag with a skull on it. It's really, really lovely. Whereas the moments where my anger and my vanity meet I am a vainglorious rocket ship, mainlighting 10,000 pounds of pure jet fuel. I am unstoppable. Now, I am the first to admit that this is not particularly healthy. But I have also accepted that there's no point in my pretending otherwise. So part of shadow work is saying, okay, Rachel, not everyone who triggers your spite is deserving of total annihilation. So what can we do to acknowledge the feelings you're having and channel them into a more constructive use of that energy? So if you're interested in unearthing what might lie in your own shadow self, I'm going to give you a couple of things to try. Have you ever noticed that when a person complains about someone else doing something wrong or is irritated about something someone else is doing, the complaint is often the thing that that very person does? How many times do liars point at others accusing them of lying? Or the bully making fun of everyone else being weak is really the one who is deeply insecure and feckless. Projection is a defense mechanism we use so we don't have to confront our shadows. Think about what you accuse other people of doing. It's not always the case, of course, but sometimes there's usually something swimming around it that's going to get you close. If you have ever started a sentence with, "Who does she think she is?" ... your shadow is likely hiding between the ... and ... So that's the first place to take a look. And if you don't even really know what that is, talk to your friends, talk to loved ones, talk to someone you trust to say, what is the thing that I do? What is the thing that I complain about? Where am I throwing stones from my glass house? Because that's part of your shadow. And then there was this really interesting thing I found online. And I don't know the origins of it, but I saw some articles that took literary archetypes like lover, hero, magician, and created shadow versions of them. So for example, the shadow of a caregiver archetype is a victim. The shadow of a hero is a coward. And I thought it would be interesting if we did the maiden, mother, and crone as examples. They take the literary archetype and then split it into a passive shadow and aggressive shadow. And it's just like what it sounds. The passive shadow is the weak, soft, diminished, wet paper towel version. And the aggressive is the opposite. It's the go get you loud in your face version of the shadow. So if we start with the maiden, a passive shadow of the maiden is a damsel in distress, tied to the train tracks, needing a hero to come and save her. And an aggressive shadow of the maiden is a hot vixen, femme fatale that is going to have sex with you and then kill you. Yeah, it's an image. So if we take the mother, the passive shadow of the mother is the guilt tripper. It's the, oh, you're never thinking about me. When are you going to call me? When are you going to come visit me? I'm going to be dead before I ever see you again. That is the passive shadow of the mother. And the aggressive is the tiger mom or the helicopter mom, the really domineering version of the mother. For the crone, the passive shadow is the hermit, whereas an aggressive shadow is the wicked witch. So you can see how they take these archetypes and then throw them out of balance. And you can go online and search for literary archetypes and see which one resonates most or which archetype you wish you were, because often we share the same shadows of the archetypes. But once you get an idea of what those traits might be, first, take a moment, give yourself a pat on the back, because the biggest, hardest step is just the recognition of that quality in yourself, being able to say, yes, this thing exists. And after that, it's a matter of taking steps to get comfortable with what's uncomfortable and getting curious about your emotions instead of reacting to them. And how many times are we going to hear? Get curious about your emotions. Hardest thing to do. Obviously easier said than done. Journaling, making art, getting some exercise, all these things can keep you steady as you face a part of yourself you've been avoiding for a really long time. The benefits of shadow work include being more confident, being more yourself, feeling whole, building healthier, more lasting relationships, and tapping into greater creativity and self-expression. So when you're ready, and you'll know when you're ready, give it a try. But I don't want to leave you without explaining what Mabon and Disco have to do with this. The autumnal equinox is this Wednesday, the 22nd. This is a little different for the Northern Hemisphere versus the Southern. In the Northern Hemisphere, the autumnal equinox marks when the nights grow longer and we're entering into the darkest parts of the year, or the shadow part of the year, hence why the time between now and the winter solstice is considered shadow season. In the Southern Hemisphere, though, this won't be until March for you. Right now, for you all, it's the opposite. You're walking into spring and the vernal equinox, which doesn't absolve you from doing shadow work, because looking at our dark side isn't limited to a couple of months in the year. But I know you have some pagans down there with some very strong feelings about Halloween. I don't have the cultural context to entirely understand, but I know some of you are celebrating Halloween coming up on October 31st, and others of you are celebrating on April 30th. So here is my advice, and take it for what all free advice is worth, especially when it comes from an American. If you follow and believe strongly with living in sync with the seasons and the pagan wheel of the year, listen to this episode and celebrate shadow season, Mabon, and Halloween or Samhain in March and April. Advance everything 6 months. The Druids did observe the equinoxes and solstices as a way to remain in sync with the seasons. That being said, and this kind of goes for everyone, the pagan wheel of the year was created by the Wiccan community in the 1950s and 60s. The Sabbats of the wheel of the year are a modern creation. Mabon, specifically, wasn't even called anything until the legend was arbitrarily ascribed to the autumnal equinox in the 1970s. To put this in perspective, the Bee Gees' "Stayin' Alive" was on the top of the charts when someone said that we should call Wednesday Mabon. Hence, disco. One of the justifications I read for using Mabon to represent the Druid observance of the equinox is because of the similarity to the story of Hades and Persephone. Mabon, like Persephone, endures imprisonment in darkness. Her marriage to Hades is a metaphoric explanation of the divide in the year between light and dark, which I only give a little bit of side-eye to since Persephone is a Greco-Roman myth. And from what I understand, many Greeks considered the Celts and Druids bloodthirsty barbarians. But, your mileage may vary. So I am absolutely not interested in someone rolling up on me about how doing what I want to do defies some sort of religious dogma. This means if you are in the Southern Hemisphere and you want to go bobbing for apples, drink pumpkin spice coffee and carve pumpkins in a sexy costume you bought online, you absolutely do that. You get my stamp of approval. But if you're Australian, I will insist you rectify the s'mores situation immediately. S''MORES, Google it. You can thank me by telling your friends to listen to my podcast. So yeah, I guess the TLDR of this episode is, if you want to get in better touch with your authentic self, warts and all, consider getting started in shadow work. Right now is a great time to take a few baby steps, 'tis the season and all. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today. The first episode of the vampire audio drama drops this week, so if that's your jam, please consider giving it a listen. Follow Vampire the Masquerade Port Saga on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to Lifemancy. Until next time, friends.